Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first installment of my second, or rather, first video on my second channel. But I thought this might be a bit of a change of pace for those of you who are familiar with my content, but I thought I'd start a little book club on this channel, as though I'm qualified to speak about, literature. But I just, I've been getting into reading a lot recently, and I thought I'd share it with you guys and force you guys to start reading by, fucking getting some deadlines on you. But no, this video is actually going to be about a book that I've read most recently, and so there's no particular reason that I'm choosing Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar to talk about today. It's just because it was the book I read most recently, and essentially what I'll do is I'll give a little introduction as to what the book is, and then I'll give the spoiler section. So if you are magnetized for whatever reason by the introduction, you can go on and read the book yourself, and I don't know, come back to the spoiler section and see what I actually think about it. But essentially, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath is a book. It's a semi-autobiographical book, which essentially means that it's about Sylvia Plath's life, but the names and places are changed to maintain anonymity at the time, which I suppose she was, all for. But essentially, it starts out with Esther, a 19-something-year-old who had a sort of scholarship or internship at fake, Ladies' Day magazine in New York. The best way I could probably describe things without giving it too much away is essentially it talks about a descent, a mental descent, given the events going on and given everything surrounding her, personal life. It's a viscerally real and frankly disturbing work to read, from how sort of authentic and relatable it can be at parts. Essentially, the deepest, darkest corners of one's mind verbalized, or rather put onto paper. And I feel like a lot of people resonate with this book because they relate to the spiky parts of Sylvia Plath's writing as well, not just whatever introspection she talks about. There's some spiky parts in there, you'll see. Some fucking crazy parts as well, so some people relate to those too. But it's essentially this work on introspection, given that she's gone to New York City. It's this bustling city around her. She's got like a lot of potential in her career and so on and so forth, and her sort of mental descent there. Now is going to be the part where I talk about specific details, because this is a spoiler section, I suppose. So if you haven't read the book and you do want to, please give it a go. It's absolutely brilliant. It's one of the best books I've ever read, and I've read quite a few. So I do, urge you to go read. But if you have, let's get into the book itself. I was debating on adding a few more books here, because I feel like it would be a bit empty. There's one book for an entire episode, but Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar is worth it. Sylvia Plath, obviously, or maybe not obviously, a month after her book, committed suicide. A month after her book was published, I think. It's never easy talking about, literature when it's that intimate, and it's got that much weight behind it, because obviously it seemed to be some sort of reflection of what, or not some sort of, like a near exact reflection of what she might have been thinking at the time. I always find that, these sort of introspective books, like another example might be Flowers for Algernon, the sort of books where you get a peer into somebody's mind. It's like from a first person perspective, whether that be through diary entries or whatever, they hit the hardest, because you can almost, you become the character temporarily. You essentially masquerade as them for a little bit. And given that, you sort of start to get agitated where Sylvia Plath gets agitated, in the book. Like, for instance, that Buddy Hollow, I think that's his name. Yeah, like he might say some shit that just irks you, or irks Sylvia, and it subsequently irks you, And also that one quote from Buddy, I can't remember, I'll paraphrase, but about, writing being dust. What a cunt. And then she talks about his cadavers that he operates on being dust too. And I thought that was a clever response, but what a cunt. Fuck you, Buddy. But yeah, I can resonate with Sylvia there. But I think for me, what got me the most with this book is just how fearlessly she shared, the corners of her mind that are just so callous and crass to hear aloud. Like if anybody were to say the things she wrote about in her book, for instance, how she thought about, I don't know, when she looked at certain men, how they stacked up, how she thought about her parents, how she thought about, even just friends from within the internship. I think if anybody were to say them aloud, you might get called a bit of a cunt, which is reasonable. But the fact that she was so, I suppose, fearless in sharing this in her work really, really got to me. I don't know why it was such a shock to me seeing just how like viscerally real somebody can be in writing. Like even the worst parts. It's essentially, there's a sort of ego barrier that comes up with people writing, even introspective works like this, because you sort of want to be perceived a certain way in writing to whoever might read the book. It seemed like Sylvia Plath had somehow just deactivated this ego barrier for the book. She talked about the sort of dichotomy between, her self-confidence and her insecurity. Like that seemed to be a heavy theme, in which in some extracts you could see she'd almost have this perception of being above everything and everybody else, and then in others she'd be completely, she sees herself as sort of a shell of a human, I suppose, like a cockroach is the best way I could describe it. Sort of beneath everything, and almost as though she didn't feel beneath other people, so to speak, but she felt beneath this sort of imaginary expectation of her, which she felt others didn't stack up to either, but she was the only one cognizant that she wasn't good enough by some imaginary standard she might have set for herself. So the polarity of it gives this like sort of feeling of being on top of the world and then subsequently getting dragged down to the very bottom. It could be random, but it also could be onset by circumstance. For instance, there was also that scene in the book where there was an attempted rape on Sylvia Plath, and you could see her sort of reaction to that when she gets back into the hotel room and takes that bath, I think, the warm bath, and then she goes back into bed. Not telling anybody about it, by the way. You could see in real time, it baffles me because it's so good. It almost feels as though she wrote that section in real time while it was happening, because it seems like such a perfect reflection of her self-worth actively diminishing, as each minute goes by after the person attempted to, assault her. Sorry if you can hear my heater, by the way. It's absolutely freezing here. It's like 4 degrees and I'm sitting in a t-shirt, so I've had to fucking put that on, even though it's loud and annoying. But if you can hear that, bear with me. But I always find it quite interesting how she thinks about body as well, or talks about body. It seems to me as though she perceives him in a high regard, but I feel like that might be an instance of the flare-up of the ego barrier in which she, she wants to not perceive him highly because, he's been with other women and he was supposed to be sort of, joined in matrimony to her. And so as a result of that betrayal in her mind, she wants to perceive him as lower, and so she kind of gets repulsed by anything he does or says, even though he's evidently quite intelligent and handsome before he gets tuberculosis. So I feel like that might be an instance of, you could see some sort of tainting of her real thoughts. I thought, at least, when she talked about body, which was interesting, possibly some sort of reaction to being quote unquote betrayed by him. I thought the writing, I've said this a million times, but I thought the writing was brilliant. The fig analogy, the jumping between houses analogy. But I do have one qualm, I suppose, and this might sound a bit funny. I think she's a bit insufferable. Listen, I get, the whole of this sort of novel is a portrayal of her depressive and manic episodes, but even in the beginning, when she went on those tirades of like, she just seems like a bit of a cunt to me. I'm not one to judge, all right, but she just seems a bit cunty. But I suppose that's part of the charm. She's very charming, I must say as well. It comes through in her writing. She's extremely charming, and I suppose it's a display of what happens when somebody with her depth of character is plunged into a world where it's obviously not stimulating enough for her, but she's a bit of a cunt, you know. Like, even I get we all have our little demons, I suppose, but she does seem like a bit of a fucking cunt. But whatever. I mean, I get why you might disagree, or I get why, I suppose, it's not entirely the case. She just seemed really superficial when she'd talk about certain people and just, you know, hyper focusing on appearance, how they look and things like that. I don't know. Rubbed me the wrong way, because nobody really sees the world that way. It's a surefire way to make yourself miserable, really. You could also see in her writing that she didn't really find anybody around her intriguing, so to speak. I don't know. A good way to stay miserable, I've found, is to essentially lose the mystique that every human you meet has. Because, like, as opposed to perceiving them as their own subjective, you know, universe of experiences and thoughts, and, you know, everybody's so multifaceted, you know, no matter what you might think. But instead of thinking that, you repudiate it and have this sort of ego complex over people, as though, oh, you know, you lose the mystique that people have in favor of them being sort of side characters in your story. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe I'm explaining it poorly. I think I am, yeah. But I'm also mean, you essentially need to perceive people for what they are, which is their own universe of experiences, their own story. Each human does have their own story and their own universe, but it didn't seem like Sylvia Plath thought that way. And as a result, she seemed sort of bored and uninterested, as though people were there to serve her in a way. I don't know. I don't fucking know. Don't kill me, please. I don't know how to, you know, I'm not good at writing or like deducing literature or whatever. I don't know. So, but yeah, it might be a good insight on, if you read the book, it might be a good insight on what the mind of a bit of a narcissist looks like. Listen, I don't think she's a narcissist, you know, outright, but she's a bit of a cunt, you know, the way she speaks about people, you know, it's a bit of narcissism at play there. But I suppose we all are a bit narcissistic in that way. And you can hear the plane go overhead. I wonder where they're going right now. Seemingly into my fucking back garden because of how loud they are, but whatever. Yeah, bit of a cunt, but really good writer, and really multifaceted, multi-dimensional woman Sylvia Plath is. And I really fucking recommend the book. It's fucking wonderful, and I don't think I'm ever going to forget the book. But yeah, that's it, really. That's it for this fucking little whatever this is. And I think what I'll do is I'll do the month of January. So starting 2026, the start of 2026, I'll upload a new video, a new book review. This one we can read together. So what I want to read is The Great Gatsby by the end of the year. So we can read it together. I think it might be a bit unfair because this is my first video on my second channel, so you might not have the chance, but I suppose you can just read The Great Gatsby and then go back to my Great Gatsby review, whatever. And I might do other book reviews without that sort of like deadline of like, oh, I'm going to read The Great Gatsby. I might just do a few book reviews here and there as well. But yeah, the next one's The Great Gatsby. Read it by 2026, please. Reading's great, and it's a great book. I haven't even read most of the classics, but whatever. Right, this was lovely and pretentious and pompous, and I better sound like a bit of a cunt, especially because I don't know what I'm talking about. So yeah, bye everybody. It's been great, and I do hope you have a great rest of your day, and I do hope you're working on those things that excite you, or you're excited about something at least. Bye now.